So am I just standing here staring now, waiting to find out if the mics are hot?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got 15 seconds.
No, I don't.
No, at the time, it's
Oh, okay.
52.
So I'm not live yet.
I'm just standing here staring now, waiting to find out if the mics are on. Okay.
Okay, great. Well, Thomas is working on directing again tonight. Welcome back to the Wednesday Night Bible Study. Cindy is going to be answering the comments on Facebook, although we are streaming to all three areas. We're streaming to our Vimeo channel, we're streaming to the church YouTube channel, and we're streaming to Facebook. But Cindy's only going to be in one place. So if you have questions, just go to Facebook and answer those questions. I hope that you've had a good week. We had a lovely Monday. The last 2 days have been a little cool, but it's supposed to be beautiful the next couple of days. So maybe you can stand outside and stay at home under the stay-at-home order as we go through this. Tonight, we're going to look at the prophet Zephaniah. I was trying to figure out how to schedule this. You know, we've been in such unusual times and how we should approach this. And I realized that I forgot to talk about the prophet Zephaniah. You know, in my exuberance to get to the prophet Ezekiel, I just couldn't get to Ezekiel soon enough. I missed Zephaniah because I was trying to approach these things chronologically. So we're going to step back in time just a little bit and talk about Zephaniah tonight. And I decided that I would probably, what are you gesturing to me about?
Tell them you're growing a beard.
Well, they probably can tell that I'm growing a beard.
Yeah, I noticed it in the...
You
Oh,
can
really?
see it more clearly here than you could Sunday.
Oh, interesting. Well, yes, I have yielded into peer pressure and am not growing a COVID beard. The peer pressure from Cindy's boss's husband and Cindy and Daniel, who all have insisted that I do this. So it's incredibly insecure for me, as I've not done this ever in my life. But I thought, hey, I'll give them this. We're living this close together. I should try to make them all happy right now, since we're all in the same house. I believe I was talking about the prophets before I needed to talk about my beard. But I decided that, on Wednesday nights, we're sort of constrained by the choir practice starting at 7 and the regular starting time at 6. But the truth is, in this digital broadcast, we're really not constrained by much of anything in that regard. So I decided that probably the best way to handle the next few weeks is to approach it by just doing one prophet a night. And so tonight and next week are probably going to be a little bit shorter because Zephaniah is a pretty short book. And next week, I think we'll do Obadiah. Which is a relatively short book. So the studies in the next couple of weeks will probably be a little bit shorter, but I think that's a better option than piling prophets on each other because I don't think we're in a rush to get through. I still have that sort of academic mindset where I have to get this in before the end of the semester, but I don't have to get this in before the end of the semester because we don't have semesters and I can do this at whatever pace I want to do this. So for that in mind, I thought we'd just do one prophet's night, Prophet Zephaniah, who unfortunately is often forgotten in the discussion of prophets, and I thought that it would be good to take some time to look at him because he's a prophet that I only recently have come to discover has a lot more going on than I thought, and actually kind of remarkable things going on with Zephaniah. So we'll talk about that in a second. So before we get going, are we good? Any questions, any comments, any struggles? We all right?
McLean Baptist Church is showing social solidarity, #social solidarity, #COVID beard.
Thank you so much for the
Support.
We need to get that hashtag trending.
appreciate social solidarity as a hashtag that's going to trend. Maybe we'll see. That might take some work.
I was
don't
thinking
know.
COVID beard, but yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that might do it. That might do it too. Well, let us look at the prophet Zephaniah. What are you laughing at? The beard. I know. You're the reason I'm doing this.
Oh, I know. Sorry.
Anyway, let's look at the prophet Zephaniah. We're going to actually, because it's a short book, we're going to read most of it, actually, when we get through it. So we'll start with the call experience in one, which has a couple of really interesting things in it, in his genealogies. Let's look at it. The word of the Lord that came to Zephaniah, son of Cushi, son of Gedaliah, son of Amariah, son of Hezekiah, in the days of King Josiah, son of Ammon of Judah. It's a mouthful as you get in that. But one kind of unusual thing is we get a really long genealogy for Zephaniah that goes all the way back to Hezekiah. And the speculation is that there's every possibility that this is King Hezekiah. I mean, we don't want to make too many leaps. I mean, you don't want to assume that all the kids were named Hezekiah a few years ago. All the boys were named Hezekiah, all the girls were named Brittany. But no, that's not the way maybe there was more than one Hezekiah. I've heard some studies suggest that 25% of Palestine in the first century was named Mary. And so it's very possible that that's the case. But it is very likely, I think, that Zephaniah is trying to connect to royalty here because we get that long genealogy. I mean, there's no real reason to give all of those names unless you're trying to call attention to something significant about it. And so I think tracking all the way back to King Hezekiah is interesting. He also never denounces the king, not personally. He denounces leaders and he denounces, corrupt things that are being corrupt in Judah, but he never mentions the king personally. He also doesn't mention poor people in Judah. So he may have some element of upper classness to him. He may, in fact, many link Zephaniah or see Zephaniah as having a number of connections to the prophet Isaiah, who we also talk about as someone who might have been related to a king and also someone who had sort of an upper class court prophet responsibility who doesn't connect quite as much to the underside of history. But saying that, there is one other really interesting thing in this opening book of Zephaniah, the very opening of the book of Zephaniah. Does anyone else see what it is?
During the days of King Josiah?
No, that's interesting.
I thought that.
You think that's interesting? It is interesting. It's not interesting, not what I'm pointing at. That's a mistake you make as a professor. You should never ask a question where you're trying to make people read your mind. That's a rookie mistake. I shouldn't have done that. That's on me. But yes, that is interesting. It is interesting that it's Josiah, which means that the date of this, late 7th century, prior to the fall of Judah, probably so Josiah puts us between 640 and 609 BC, but because of his denouncing the leadership, it's probably 640 to 630 is what we're talking about. So really early, before the big reforms of Josiah, the Deuteronomic reform we talked about, the finding of the scroll, all of that. Zephaniah's preaching probably coming very, very early as we go through there. So Daniel is sneaking away very quietly, so if you notice that. So that's all right, no problem. I've already blamed you for the growing of the beard, in case you were curious. So you and, your mom and Carol's husband. I know, thank you. Daniel's very supportive of the beard. So anyway, so that's the date, which we're going to talk about in a second. But there's actually one other interesting thing in this, and it's one of those things that maybe you might not even see it if you don't read Hebrew, but you might actually. Hey,
Come on.
I know you took Hebrew
I don't read it.
because I was the Hebrew professor that you took it from, which is another interesting story that we'll spare the internet from right now.
So
It-
just tell us.
It actually is the name of his father, the person who's listed as his father, Cushi. Because Cushi,
Cushites.
exactly, Cushi in Hebrew is the way you would say Cushite. And the Cushites are sub-Saharan African, so what we would normally think of as Ethiopia. That area is normally Cush. And it is usually sometimes referred to as Black Africa. That is the same. It's a synonym for Nubia in the Egyptian in the Egyptian terms. They would talk about the Kushite dynasty or the Nubian dynasty. It's the same dynasty, the 25th dynasty in Egypt. And interestingly enough, the Kushites just before this controlled Egypt in the 25th dynasty. Literally 10 to 15 years prior to this, the native Egyptians regained control of Lower Egypt 10 years before the earliest he could have preached. So really recent that there would be a prominent Cushite presence there, very, very close to Israel. And so it has been speculated, and I think very compellingly and very likely, that Zephaniah was in fact a black Jew a black Jewish prophet practicing there prophesying in Judah at this time. By the way, interesting, the Kushite Empire had the Boston Museum of Fine Art has a number of really great artifacts. But one of the sections they have is from the Kushite or Nubian Egyptian dynasties. They have several pieces there, and all of them are carved out of black basalt stone. So all of the sphinxes are carved out of the black basalt stone. The pharaohs are carved out of that, all of these things. And the Boston Museum of Art really just made me laugh so hard because underneath it on the information pad, it said, for some reason, the Kushite Empire preferred using black basalt stone to the traditional limestone or other white stones. And I thought, really? For some reason, they preferred the black. Maybe someday science will be able to answer the question why. But for now, we're just going to have to live with the mystery at why the Cushites might have preferred using the black basalt stones to carve their pharaonic images. Anyway, I just think it's significant that here we have Zephaniah as, and this is not the only reason. I mean, that's a compelling enough reason to say he is the son of a Cushite. I think that the fact that that's the same as the name, I mean, that's a compelling reason. But there are a couple other clues, I think, in the rest of the text. I'll point those out as we get there that indicate he probably has some very strong connections to Cush or Ethiopia as we go through. So how are we doing? We all good? Great. Terrific. So let's get back to what Cindy was talking about. This is in the days of King Josiah. So as I say, the date 640 to 609, 610. But clearly before, I think, Josiah's reform, because he condemns the corrupt and perverse religious practices. So that puts him very early in Josiah's reign. Because remember, Josiah, once he got his act together, there's really no need to be preaching prophetically at that point.
That would be my question.
Yeah. That was your question? Why is that early? Yeah. Well, that's the answer. So most people put it in this decade, which, as I say, is 10 to 15 years after the fall of the Cushite control of Lower Egypt, which is fascinating. This is one of those things where I just think it's really, really interesting, and it provides an interesting context. I don't know how much context it provides, but I think that's just really cool to have, that evidence of what we would consider people of color even at the time. It just is a reminder, I think, that sometimes we get so concrete about the way we think. Here's where the Moabites lived, and here's where the Ammonites lived, and here's where the Judeans lived, and here's where the Israelites lived. And the reality is that people traded and moved and mingled and immigrated and emigrated, and the world was a complicated place. And it was a complicated place then. It's a complicated place now. The world's a complicated place and always has been. People haven't changed that much, as I've said many times. So, all right. I'm going to have to move that arrow. It's going to drive me nuts.
Thank you.
Yes. It always does. I had it moved earlier, but then I came back to it. The literary structure, this is a little overly simplified, but it's pretty close. Chapter 1 is preaching against Judah. Chapter 2 is an oracle against the foreign nations. And chapter 3 is the salvation that is to come. The beginning of chapter 3 is the problems with Jerusalem and then how we're going to get them redeemed. But as always, the prophets always finish with a word of hope. That is the way they always construct all of their oracles. No matter how bad it is, no matter how dark it is, there is always a moment of hope when we come to the end of that. So it is structured in that same way. So we'll start with the preaching against Judah. I will utterly sweep away everything from the face of the earth, says the Lord. I will sweep away humans and animals. I will sweep away the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. I will make the wicked stumble. I will cut off humanity from the face of the earth, says the Lord. We get a lot of this is one of those times I like to take a step back and appreciate the poetic artistry of the writer here, because he does some neat things really well. We have a threefold use of I will sweep away, I will sweep away, I will sweep away. So we're driving that point home as we go. We also have a really clever inclusio, because what you have here is earth here and earth here are the word adamah. It's a word that's normally translated ground or dirt. It's not normally, it's earth as in the dirt. It's not earth as in, we would think of the globe earth. This is earth. Humans here and humanity here, Adam. The word that's translated Adam, but it's also humankind. It's sometimes referred to as male, but not often. It's usually ish if you need male. So we have Adma, Adam, Adam, Adma. So it makes a really nice inclusio as you go through that beginning of the chapter there. Also, you get from the face of the earth here and from the face of the earth here, making a nice inclusio. So, face of the earth, Adama, Adama. Sweeping away from the face of the earth echoes Genesis 6 and 8 when God is removing humanity from the face of the earth before the flood. So it's a reference to, remember we talked about the flood. The flood is an evidence of chaos undoing creation. God is rebooting creation. We're starting over at the chaos waters. And in case you miss that reference as some indication of the return of chaos, You then get the creation of humans and animals, birds and fish in exactly the reverse order that they occur in Genesis chapter 1. So creation is undoing as we get through here in Zephaniah. We're going to destroy, basically, the world. God is, again, getting rid of all these people from the face of the earth. So, we good? Yeah, I love the artistry. I just want to take every now and then to pause, because these guys were gifted poetic speakers, and it's worth celebrating their gifts, I think, sometimes. So, I will stretch out my hand against Judah, against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. I will cut off from the place every remnant of Baal and the name of the idolatrous priests. He's very big on hitting the leadership all throughout this book, that they are culpable for taking advantage and misleading people as they go. Be silent before the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is at hand. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He's consecrated his guest. And on the day of the Lord's sacrifice, I will punish the officials, the king's sons, all who dress, not the king, you notice that? Just the officials and the king's sons. And all who dress themselves in foreign attire. On that day, I will punish all who leap over the threshold, who fill their master's house with violence and fraud. So God has consecrated an offering, and the people that he has trusted and invited are profaning that offering. And God is not going to put up with that. God is going to act against that as he goes. So, on that day, says the Lord, a cry will be heard from the fish gate, a wail from the second quarter, a loud crash from the hills. The inhabitants of the mortar wail, for all the traders have perished. All who weigh silver out are cut off. At that time, I will search Jerusalem with lamps, punish the people who rest complacently on their dregs, those who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good, nor will he do harm. Their wealth shall be plundered and their houses laid waste. Though they build houses, they shall not inhabit them. Though they plant vineyards, they shall not drink wine from them. So we see that revisiting of the day of the Lord. Zephaniah, probably last time we saw this so explicitly expressed was Amos. He was sort of the first one to talk about the day of the Lord. But Isaiah does, Ezekiel does. We're going to see later Joel does, though it's kind of a little bit reversed when Joel does it. At this point, he is talking to leadership. At this point, he's talking to people who think and expect the day of the Lord to be a good thing. The day of the Lord was the day everybody in the public believed the day of the Lord was the day that God was going to come and destroy God's enemies. And so it's going to be a great day. And the prophets come along and take that expectation and flip it on its head and say, yeah, it is the day that God's going to come destroy his enemies, but you've made yourselves enemies of God. And so it is not, this is Amos's woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. So this is radical. I mean, he's going against everyone's expectation. All the prophets, all the priests, all the leadership, all the people who considered themselves on God's side. He's coming along and saying, yeah, your expectations are theologically upside down. You're actually the bad guys. You're not the good guys as we go through all this. And so, go ahead.
What other prophets would there have been at this time saying this same thing?
Jeremiah, Nahum, Habakkuk, maybe Joel, maybe Obadiah. Don't know. They could be later. They could be earlier. And those are just the writing prophets that we have. Ezekiel is going to be, he's not going to be now. He's going to be just after this. Plus the prophets that are true prophets we don't know about, like the woman Huldah, who's going to be prophesying about this time. She's not a writing prophet, but she's certainly a prophet. There were some, but most of the prophets were chaplains of the state. Most of the prophets were in the pocket of the king, saying what the king wanted to hear and making sure to enforce that religious message to the people, so they did not, so that the king was actually syncretized to God's will at the same time, and national goals were syncretized to God's will. And it was people like Zephaniah and Jeremiah who are coming along and being called treasonous because of that.
Would they be prophesying in different areas? I mean, would there be any overlap? Would they have known each other kind of thing?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe. I mean, I think Zephaniah is clearly in Jerusalem. He does seem to have some connection to the king's court. Jeremiah would have been a little younger at this point, but Jeremiah's chapters 2-6, I think, clearly come from this same exact time period. They might have known each other. That's why I think it's fascinating when they find the scroll in the temple and they say, and Josiah says, go ask a prophet what this means. They had all those people to go talk to. They had Jeremiah, they had Zephaniah, they had Habakkuk, they had Nahum, they had maybe Joel, and they go to Huldah, the woman. the priestess, the prophetess in Jerusalem to get a word from her. I find that fascinating that that's the person that they go to. And she tells them bad things are coming. The merchants have a problem here, the people who are money. And you know what really seems to upset God here is that there's a practical atheism that these people have. They believe in God, but they don't think God has anything to do with the day-to-day living of their lives. God's not going to do any good. God's not going to do any bad. Doesn't make any difference what we do. We're all in this. We're on our own, and we're going to trust in our wealth. We're going to trust in our houses. We're going to trust in the vineyards we planted, because we're going to have to be self-sufficient in this. God's not going to be able. God doesn't do anything in this world. God's not involved. I mean, it really is that deistic perspective of the Enlightenment period, the Thomas Jefferson, that and John Adams spin the world and God steps back and that's it, hands off. That's what Zephaniah is condemning. This belief that God is somehow distant from this. God said, no, I'm not distant from this. I'm about to be very hands-on in this circumstance as we go. So good. How are we doing? Yeah.
No questions yet.
Okay, drinking my Fresca again. So sponsorship space still available, Bob. So I have to think about that. Anyway, so we'll move on to the end of chapter 1. The great day of the Lord is near and hastening fast. The sound of the day of the Lord is bitter. The warrior cries aloud there. The day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of ruin, devastation, a day of darkness and gloom. The best way to hear this, I think, to understand how it was heard, is think in terms of the second coming of Jesus heard by Christians. Right? When Christians, think of all the Southern gospel songs that think about Jesus coming soon, right? How many songs are about the King is coming and the Lord's coming soon? All these songs. And it's never negative, right? It's the King is coming is a positive thing. Jesus is going to come in soon is a positive thing. And this is what he is saying about that experience. The warrior cries, a day of wrath, a day of distress, a day of anguish, a day of devastation, to people who consider themselves followers of God. This is not to the pagan or to the heretic. This is to you who consider yourself on God's side. It's a day of wrath and day of anguish. And so you can understand why the prophets were not popular. This is not a well-received message in this. It's never going to be. So God is a warrior in Zephaniah. So I will bring such distress upon people that they shall walk like the blind, because they've sinned against the Lord. Their blood shall be poured out like dust, their flesh like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them. So this trusting in wealth is not new. It never has been. Enough money ain't going to help. You were not righteous. On the day of the Lord's wrath, in the fire of his passion, the whole earth shall be consumed. For a full, terrible end, he will make all the inhabitants of the earth. Interesting that the judgment is global. It's not just related, not just Jerusalem, it was Jerusalem and Judah at the beginning, but we've moved now. And we're also, it's another, he does a great inclusio, right? Because we talk at Jerusalem and Judah, then the judgment comes on everybody, then the judgment on Jerusalem and Judah again, then the redemption for everybody. And it's really kind of a cool pattern that he sets up as he goes through the book.
So, is God blaming God's people for the condemnation of the whole world as well?
Yes. Yeah. Because Israel and Judah's job was to be a light to the nations, right? All the nations of the world, and you didn't. No.
So not only is he destroying them, he's destroying
Right.
the nation.
Your power, your privilege,
You were responsible.
your position were to be used for others. And you decided to use it for yourself, and now judgment is coming on everybody because of that. Yeah. And from an open theist perspective, it is because you aren't teaching and showing and guiding in how people need to live, they are making choices that bring about their own destruction as we go, by not conforming to that. Yeah. So chapter 2. Now we're going to move the judgment more global. Gather together, gather, O shameless nation, before you are driven away. like the drifting chaff, before there comes upon you the fierce anger of the Lord, before there comes upon you the day of the Lord's wrath. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land who do his commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you may be hidden on the day of the Lord's wrath. For Gaza shall be deserted, and Ashkelon shall become like a desolation. Ashdod's people shall be driven out at noon, and Ekron shall be uprooted. So this is the opening of the oracles against the nations. Go ahead.
We have a question.
Please.
Bob Wallace.
Okay.
Doesn't it rains on the just and unjust reinforce the concept that God isn't greatly involved in the day-to-day?
No, God, it rains on the just and the unjust is a message in the Sermon on the Mount that says God does not change his attitudes towards people based on what people do. God is consistent in showing grace to everyone. You don't earn a position of grace. You can't blame the rain, or the rain is not necessarily negative in that context. The sun and the rain are in that passage. And the rain and the sun come on the just and the unjust because God does not change God's reaction to humanity based on how humanity responds to God, is the message of Jesus there, that grace comes to everyone, which moves it a little further.
If this was in Mesopotamia, the how rain would be perceived would be a bit different.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, water is perceived in different ways, but rain, I know that passage has historically, particularly in America, been thought of as rain is bad and, sun is good. But when you're from Kansas, that's not the case. Rain's a good thing. You need it. You don't need too much, but you need it, or you don't get your crops. So yeah, I mean, Indiana, Kansas, Illinois, we get this. You need rain. So absolutely. We good? We'll see if we're good. I got to wait 15 seconds to find out if we're good. Yeah. So this is opening our Oracle Against the Nations section. And these are your typical nations. These are the nations that are right around Judah, right? Gaza, Ashdod, these are cities, Ashdod and Ashkelon, that are over on the coast. Ekron, these actually, now that I look at that, these are all Philistine cities. These are the big cities of the Philistines. Ekron was a major olive oil producer. That has nothing to do with this lesson right now, but I remembered it, so I thought I would share it. Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Moab, Ammon, it's your typical Assyria, just your typical list, right? All the people right around Judah and Assyria. That is not an uncommon list. So the funny thing about this list is who is in this list? Ethiopia is in this list. Ethiopia is not right next to Judah at all, right? I mean, this is sub-Saharan Africa. The problem with all of these nations is twofold. They scoffed at Israel, probably implying that they participated in the attacks, which, remember, that always, people never like that. They pointed and said, aha, that kind of thing, like Ezekiel said. And they were proud. We're going to see that verse in a second. I am, and there is none else. It's all about me. So that's the biggest thing. But in the midst of Moab, the Philistines, Moab, Ammon, Assyria, comes, you also, O Ethiopian, shall be killed by my sword. That's it. That's the only thing. It's like verse 12 gets tossed in there. And the Ethiopians too, I bring up for a completely random reason. For no reason whatsoever, except for the fact that apparently I think his father happened to be an Ethiopian, and he was himself at least half Ethiopian in his race. That is the word, by the way, Kushim, Ethiopians. Same exact words as chapter 1, verse 1. Kushi. This is the plural, Kushim, Ethiopians, but the same exact word. So I am completely convinced that his father was from Ethiopia. There's no question in my mind. There are plenty of people who disagree with me. And just say, no, that's the ends of the earth.
It wouldn't be the Bible if there
well,
were
that's
people that disagreed with
if
you.
people weren't disagreeing with me, I wouldn't be an academic if I didn't have a position people disagreed with. So,
Exactly.
yeah. But anyway, I just that is not an insignificant insertion there. When I was thinking about this today, it reminded me, some of you, I'm going to reveal my age, some of you, or what a great father I am, will remember WKRP in Cincinnati. Woo! That great comedy back in the 70s. And Cindy will now perform the theme song for us. The beginning of Les Nessman's newsreel, where he says, Bangkok, Madrid, Moscow, Cincinnati, from the four corners of the earth, right? That's all I can think of is Moab, Ammon, Assyria, Ethiopia. I mean,
Yeah,
it's that kind of,
exactly. It's
what?
like-
How is that in the list? Why is Ethiopia in the list? Because that's where you're from. Why is Cincinnati in the list? That's where Les Nessman is doing his news broadcast from. So it's an odd parable, but I actually think it holds to why you find Cincinnati in the list of Les Nessman's four corners of the earth, although as I remember, he had 5 of them in the list.
Yeah, I think he
London,
did.
Paris, Madrid, Bangkok, Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Moscow.
Was
yeah.
Moscow in it?
Moscow was in there,
Anyway,
yeah.
sorry.
Cincinnati. Those 5 things from the 4 corners of the earth. Anyway.
Starting to get sidetracked. Continue.
That's really important we answer this question.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then we have the basic Assyrian warning, you know, where we're going to make them a waste like a desert, herds of wild animals, desert owls. They're going to come in. It's going to be terrible. Dogs and cats living together. It's your basic destruction that's coming.
Bob Wallace is very excited about the WKRP reference.
That's because Bob Wallace is an intelligent man who understands good shows and good comedy. That's why. I mean, this is obvious. And there's probably no finer half hour of television than the Thanksgiving Day episode. Let's just all be honest about that. Let's just go ahead and say it. Anyway, a Thanksgiving Day tradition in the Wallace house. Anyway, Assyria's great crime is what I referenced before. Is this the exultant city that lived secure, that said to itself, I am, and there is no one else? What a desolation it has become, a lair for wild animals. So, like, oh, you all big and bad now, thinking you were all that? You ain't nothing, you know? So don't start nothing, won't be nothing. That's basically, I mean, his message here is, you know, you thought yourself independent, the great, powerful, we saw this in Nahum, right? The great, powerful Assyria and Nineveh, the ones who made everyone in the world flee from before them. And now you're getting destroyed. Wow, how about that? So, yeah. I do love everyone who passes by it hisses and shakes the fist. Yes, you can't read that without acting it out for some reason. So, anyway. Okay.
I'm just gonna assume they mean cursing or did they? What,
Yeah, it is.
Really
It's
just mean hissing.
yeah. It's a way of cursing someone. Haven't you ever seen people drive in 5 o'clock traffic around here?
And-
You know,
and
there's plenty
hiss
of
and
hissing.
shake their
There's
fist.
plenty of hissing and shaking the fist. Cindy coming out of the city about 5 o'clock.
I don't know
yeah.
about shaking the fist, but there's always a nice one.
At least one finger of the fist is being shaken.
Yes.
I'm absolutely positive about that. So let's get to chapter 3, the future restoration. As I say, always hope. Always hope. What is really interesting about Zephaniah, the judgment was universal in chapter 2. The restoration is universal in chapter 3. That restoration is going to be for the world. And Jerusalem's punishment will end. The exiles will be brought home. Fortunes will be restored. It's going to good things. But first we have to get through Jerusalem being so bad. Soiled and defiled, oppressing city. It's not good. It has listened to no voice. It has accepted no correction. It has not trusted in the Lord. It has not drawn near to its God. There were prophets who spoke. We've mentioned them. Jeremiah, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Nahum, Obadiah, maybe Joel. There are prophets who preached. They're not listening to anything. They were busy trusting in themselves the whole time. And the prophets that agreed with them. You know, that was the goal. They've not drawn near to their God. The officials within it, roaring lions. Its judges are evening wolves that leave nothing until the morning. This reminds me of Ezekiel's pasturing themselves on their sheep kind of idea. And here are leadership that are actually predators on their people to maintain their position. Its prophets are reckless, faithless persons. Its priests have profaned what is sacred. They've done violence to the Torah in this. So again, judgment on those who are using power and position for self and using it on the backs of the poor and not being true to Torah, which the center of Torah has always been. You take care of the helpless. You help the helpless. You lift up the orphan. You lift up the widow. You take care of the immigrant, the people with no representation. You're standing up for them in the country. That's what Torah was about, Leviticus 19. And the prophets don't get it. They're faithless people. Now, this is, as I said, when the exile came, most of the prophets really took a hit because most of the prophets were saying it's not a problem. Most of the prophets were chaplains of the state. It was rare to have the Zephaniahs and Ezekiels and Jeremiahs of the world. But since they were the ones who were shown to be true, their writings were the ones that were kept. We don't know if the others even wrote anything. Don't really know. So, the Lord within it is righteous. He does no wrong. Every morning he renders his judgment. Each dawn without fail, but the unjust knows no shame. They don't even get it. They don't even understand that they're how bad they are. But wait for me, says the Lord. For the day when I arise as a witness for my decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out upon them my indignation, all the heat of my anger, for in the fire of my passion all the earth shall be consumed. At that time I will change the speech of peoples to pure speech, that all of them, so it's seen as consumption, but it's also seen as purification and teaching on some level too, that punishment will show them how to do this, to have pure speech, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord, serve him with one accord, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. So we even get, people brought in from all the way beyond the rivers of, just as a random place we could pick, say, Mead? No, Mead's not right. The Hittites, that's another, no, let's go. You know what? Ethiopia. That was just picked that place randomly. Again, exactly the same word.
Purely random.
Just totally random. That's sarcasm, in case people aren't picking that up. I actually believe it's not random as we go through. For beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, my scattered ones shall bring my offering. So that's what I said. There are clues that I don't think Cushi is necessarily a name. Or maybe it is. Maybe his dad was a guy named Austin from Austin. He was Cushi from Cushi. Cush. You don't know. That happens. Not uncommon to have people named for places. Austin's the first one that came to my mind. What are other names for people? You think of any others? You know any people, place names?
No,
That was
I don't know many people named Boston, so
no, Washington.
Virginia.
Yeah, that was Ethan. Yeah. Austin's my best option there, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's my go-to
let's
on
go
that.
with Austin.
Let's go with Austin. Okay. People are out there shouting. This is what it feels like to be a ghost. People think of names and they can't yell back at the screen. Anyway, then we get the hope. Sing aloud, O daughter Zion. Shout, O Israel. Rejoice, exult with all your heart, daughter Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away. So again, global. So Jerusalem judgment, global judgment, Jerusalem judgment, global restoration, Jerusalem restoration. It's just kind of a neat structure, I think, as it goes through. The Lord has taken away the judgments against you, turned away your enemies. The King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst. You shall fear disaster no more. On that day it shall be said to Jerusalem, do not fear, O Zion, do not let your hands grow weak. The Lord your God is in your midst, a warrior who gives you victory. He'll rejoice over you with gladness, renew you in his love. He will exult over you with a loud singing. As on a day of festival, I will remove disaster from you, so you will not bear reproach for it. I will deal with all your oppressors at that time. I will save the lame, gather the outcast, change their shame into praise, and renown in all the earth. At that time, I will bring you home. At that time, when I gather you, for I will make you renowned and praised among all the peoples of the earth when I restore your fortunes before your eyes, says the Lord. This, of course, comes to have a strong messianic expectation. That this is when the nation is restored, and it obviously was very, very prominent in Zionistic philosophy in the early 20th century and continues to be so. But it is the last word of hope is God will bring you back and gather you back. So
And then offers for dogs named Raleigh.
Raleigh, there you go. There's one. I've known there are people named Sir Walter Raleigh, I guess, is named Raleigh. So,
I know a person named Carlisle,
okay,
I guess. I don't know. We're just throwing out examples now.
So I have a question.
sure.
If you go back to the beginning, Judah's judgment.
How far?
No.
No,
The
no.
judgment part.
The judgment part.
Judgy part.
The judgy part.
That one judge.
This part, or with the global judgment? And-
Yes.
This is the global judgment. Then we get to Jerusalem
Oh,
judgment.
okay. So here's my question.
Okay.
I have heard people say during this global
Oh.
pandemic.
Yeah, I see where we're going.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
That this is, one of them said specifically to me, this is God's judgment
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't do our jobs as Christians
Mm-hmm.
and uphold God's law
Hmm.
around us and in our nation and in the world. And so this coronavirus is God's judgment.
Well-
and I've heard that throughout my life, whether it
Yes.
was 9/11 or whether it was coronavirus or whether it was HIV.
I wonder if people
back
can
in the
hear
80s.
you. Can people hear you? I wonder.
don't know. And so I have heard this
They
throughout
can?
my life. Whenever anything bad happens,
Sure.
that is God's judgment.
Yes.
Katrina
Right.
was God's judgment.
Right.
So, and when you read things like this,
Yes.
I see why they say that.
Yes.
Because I will sweep away.
So here's the
So
thing.
what do you say
Right.
to people who offer
Yes.
those positions?
Okay. The quick one thing that's important to say is that very often, as long as I'm allowed to define the theological terms you're using, I'm probably okay with it.
What do you mean?
I mean, what you said was that disaster can be a sign that humanity has not upheld God's law and the way God and there are ways in which I could agree with that. That systemic injustice forcing individuals to live in poor hygiene area that result in numbers of deaths and increased cases of cholera are a manifestation of humanity not upholding God's way of living and judgment coming on them because of that. The problem is, the difficulty we're having here is this, that we in 21st century America speak of, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, speak of natural and supernatural as separate things. And so if you are of a theological position that doesn't do that, like a very hyper Calvinistic position that would attribute everything to the divine, then there really is no place else to go theologically except that. I mean, to the point that, the old joke about what did the Calvinist say when he fell down the stairs? Wow, I'm glad that's over. There is no such thing as individual responsibility. There is no such thing as human choice. Everything is orchestrated and moved. And so you're left with no position except that. It will come to no one's surprise that that is not my theological upbringing. Although very often when you hear me talk about God, I sound very Reformed, very Calvinistic in the way I talk about God because God's sovereignty is important to me. But my ultimate foundational belief is that God is love and that everything proceeds out of that. If you believe God's sovereignty is the top and you believe his love comes out of his sovereignty, then you can have that position. If you believe God's love is the top and his sovereignty comes out of love, then that's a different issue for me, okay? So while I am not going to say God makes people sick, because I don't believe that. God makes people sick. I will say that humanity makes choices that do not conform to the way in which God asks us to live, that can bring about actions and destructions and problems that actually are connected directly to not being the people God called us to. You know, that Katrina affected so many individuals who were poor. That I'm not going to say that God sent that hurricane, but I'm going to say that much of the death toll that came because of choices humanity made to force people in those areas. Now, the other thing about this, and this is the other side of this, is, and I've said this already, you never underestimate what God can do with what humanity gives, even disobedience and destruction. And so but that also creates a problem for people. When the drunk driver comes to a saving knowledge of God because he killed a 17-year-old, I don't believe God willed the death of the 17-year-old to convert the drunk driver. But I do believe that it's something that God can bring from that and some level of redemption of that experience as best as humanity can give. So when we read these passages, I think it's important to remember the theology they are coming from doesn't separate natural and supernatural. You can only attribute these things to God. And they are expressing that in a way that is completely consistent with their worldview, but I also think their understanding of who God is not, it's not a 5-point Calvinist at the end of the day for them. That is not the nature of, it's a royal picture of God, it's a strongly masculine picture of God, because that's the world in which they lived at the time. But but like I said, I tend to be much more open theist on that. And, on some levels, so reformed that I look more like Roger Williams' reform position, which is, he was so reformed he believed in free will. I mean, he just went so Calvinistic, he just kept going. So that's a really long answer to say that's not my perspective. Though I do believe it is a reminder of the responsibility that we have to live as God called us to live. Because very often we can bring about, the choices we make can bring about it. I mean, yeah, we hear this here, but later on, the way he's talking about the leadership makes it sound like a lot of this happened because of what they were doing. And the Bible tells that story about Zedekiah and Jehoiakim making choices that brought about their own destruction. And, so they're walking that line, I think, in a way that they're coming to express it in a way that you don't see expressed until later. So that's a really long answer, I know, but that's my theological.
Very helpful, I thought.
Okay. So, any questions, any rebuttals coming in?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I guess that went longer than I thought it would, even with a short book like Zephaniah. So thank you for tuning in on this. Let me remind you that Holy Week is coming up, and this is a very strange Holy Week, obviously, stranger than we could ever imagine. We're going to be worshiping a lot more like the first century Christians. We're going to be worshiping in our homes, not for fear of persecution by the Romans, but fear of persecution by the coronavirus. So we'll be worshiping in homes as the early Christians did. Go ahead.
Would you have a question?
Please.
You want to finish your thought?
No, I'll get back to it. Go ahead.
If all the humans, animals, bird, and fish have been swept from the earth, who is left to restore? Beth Harvey.
I think we are dealing with a hyperbola here. That this is a reference to the flood narrative to call to mind that God is bringing chaos, which, by the way, is always how Day of the Lord is thought of. Chaos is never destroyed in the Old Testament. Chaos is confined, and every now and then it breaks back out. And so it is ordered, but then, the waters above are sealed with the great dome of heaven from the waters below. But then in the flood, the holes get poked in and the waters come back down. And the destruction of Judah is also portrayed as the chaos waters coming back. So, in fact, that's why in the book of Revelation, there's no sea, there's no ocean, because ultimately it is finally destroyed. Chaos is finally and ultimately, spoiler alert in Revelation, but yeah, that the chaos is finally destroyed there. So that we're looking forward to that time when the evil doesn't come back. And so I think it's using these terms to invoke that chaos coming out. So I think it's a form of hyperbole here. That'd be my answer. So should I wait 15 seconds to see if that was a satisfying answer, or should I continue?
I don't know.
No, I'll keep going and interrupt again if you need to. But because we have a unique Holy Week, and as I say, we're going to be worshiping as the early church does, some of you have received the email and have already reached back out, which is wonderful. But I would like for our Maundy Thursday service to reflect what we are doing to love one another. The mandatum, the mandate that Christ gives on that Thursday before he is crucified on Friday, is to love one another. That is what Maundy Thursday is named for, is that love one another. And so I wanted to find ways in which you are showing love one for another through this time. I've been cooking for the family quite a bit. I know that some people have learned to ride bikes. Some people have been sewing masks for medical equipment. Cindy, thanks you for that. She's still, by the way, going to the VA twice a week now. And we make her decon in the garage. So she changes clothes and showers downstairs before we let her into the house. But she thanks you for those of you who are doing that. But there have been a number of ways. People have made phone calls. People have just, whatever it might be. Just take your phone and make a very brief video. And we're not looking for professional production quality here. Just take a few moments to share 30 seconds, a minute, no more than 2 minutes, about what you're doing to reach out to family, reach out to yourself, how you're spending time. We're showing we love one another by staying at home right now. So that's sort of the basic way. But what does that look like for you? and that will be the way in which we will celebrate Maundy, Thursday. I'll put a brief montage of these videos together so we get to see each other's faces, talk about what we're doing, update that, and I'll share that on Thursday night. I've already gotten some videos and they're wonderful. Thank you for that. Go ahead and email them to me at rwallace@mcleanbaptist.org. And I'll put that together. Thankfully, I developed rather crude video editing skills when I was a professor, and so I should have a pretty quick turnaround on that. Get them to me by Tuesday at noon, so I can get those back. So please do that. There's something else I was going to share about this, and I can't remember now. Palm Sunday is coming up. It's going to be an unusual Palm Sunday. The stay-at-home order does allow staff of non-essential businesses to go to work in small settings. And so the staff will continue to stream worship from the sanctuary for as long as we can on Sunday, for as long as they feel that they're safe to do it and they're feeling healthy and we're feeling healthy. And so that's something we're going to do. Beyond that, I don't think I have any more announcements. Are there any other questions or thoughts?
Did you remember what you were going
I
to
didn't.
say?
I don't remember what else I was going to say, but that's no surprise. Absent-minded professor gets more true every day, so. All right, okay. Well, thank you so much for joining the Bible study. Like I said, next week we'll be looking at probably Obadiah, which is a very short book, but a really interesting book. And I think it'll be a short Bible study, but I thought this would be a short Bible study, and we went the full time. So we will see. It's actually a book I really, really enjoy, Obadiah. I know that sounds strange to say, because whoever looks at Obadiah, this one chapter book in the Old Testament, but I think that it's really an interesting book. So that's my tease for next week. So have a great week. I will see you Sunday. Hopefully you will see me Sunday. I hope to see you soon. Send those videos, and